In 1945, amid the ashes of Tokyo, a 17-year-old girl made a choice that would haunt her for 70 years. She stole a dead woman's name, married an American soldier, and sailed to a new life built on a lie. For 7 decades, not even her own daughter knew the truth of who she really was. But in 2015, at 87 years old, the woman the world knew as Chio Nakamura did something no immigrant wife would dare do today. She confessed. The firebombing of Tokyo on the night of March 9, 1945, turned the sky blood red. 2 girls ran through streets that had become rivers of flame, their lungs burning from smoke and heat. One was named Chio Nakamura, a 15-year-old from a respectable family who dreamed of becoming a teacher. The other was named Hisako Mizuki, also 15, the daughter of a disgraced Yakuza lieutenant who had been executed for betraying his clan. The girls had been unlikely friends, brought together by chance when they ended up working at the same munitions factory after their schools closed. That night, they ran together with thousands of others, a panicked mass of humanity trying to escape death that fell from the sky. The B-29 bombers had dropped over 1,600 tons of incendiary bombs on the densely packed wooden neighborhoods of eastern Tokyo. The fires created winds so fierce they ripped people off their feet and sucked them into the inferno. Chio and Hisako ran with their arms linked, refusing to let go of each other. They were heading toward the Sumida River, hoping the water would protect them. But the crush of bodies was overwhelming. People trampled each other. Mothers lost their children in the chaos. The heat was so intense that skin blistered from a distance. A building exploded in front of them, sending a wall of flame across their path. In the chaos, they were separated by the surging crowd. Hisako was pushed one direction, Chio another. Hisako screamed Chio's name, but could not fight the tide of panicked humanity. Hisako survived that night by jumping into the freezing Sumida River and staying submerged as the firestorm raged overhead. When dawn finally came, the city was gone. Over 16 square miles of Tokyo had been reduced to ash and charred bodies. The official death toll was over 100,000, but no one really knew. Bodies were everywhere, piled in the streets, floating in the river, burned beyond recognition. Hisako wandered through the ruins for hours in shock, her clothes burned and torn, her hands blistered, her mind barely functioning. She searched for Chio, calling her name until her voice gave out. And then she found her. Chio Nakamura lay in a cleared area where survivors had dragged bodies, her face peaceful despite the burns on her arms and legs. She had not made it to the river. The smoke had taken her before the flames could. Hisako knelt beside her friend's body and wept. They had survived so much together, working brutal hours at the factory, sharing meager rations, dreaming of a future after the war. And now Chio was gone. Just one more name on an endless list of the dead. Hisako sat there for a long time, numb with grief and exhaustion, not knowing what to do or where to go. Then reality crashed down on her. She had nowhere to go. Her father had been killed 2 years earlier, executed by his own Yakuza clan for stealing money and trying to flee. Her mother had died of shame shortly after, unable to bear the disgrace. Hisako had been living in a dormitory for factory workers, but the dormitory was now ash. She had no family, no home, and worse, she carried her father's shame. In traditional Japanese society, the sins of the father marked the entire family. She was tainted, untouchable, the daughter of a traitor and a thief. Even before the war, she had faced discrimination because of her father's disgrace. After his execution, it became unbearable. People refused to associate with her. Employers turned her away. She had only gotten the factory job because they were desperate for workers and did not check backgrounds carefully. But now, in the chaos of post-war Tokyo, with millions displaced and desperate, who would help the daughter of a disgraced Yakuza? She would be pushed to the absolute bottom of society, forced into prostitution or worse just to survive. As she sat beside Chio's body, a terrible thought entered her mind. Chio Nakamura had come from a good family. Her father had been a respected businessman who died honorably in the war. Her mother Fumiko was known in the community as a proper, traditional woman. The Nakamura name carried no shame, no stigma. Chio had a future, even in the ruins. Hisako had nothing. The thought grew stronger. No one could identify bodies anymore. Everything was chaos. Chio's face was recognizable, but in a few hours, The authorities would take the bodies away to mass graves or cremation sites. If Hisako claimed to be Chio Nakamura, who would know? Who would question? In the devastation, with records destroyed and families scattered, identity was whatever you said it was. Hisako struggled with the decision for hours. It felt like a desecration, a betrayal of her dead friend. But the alternative was a life of shame and degradation, possibly death. Chio was gone. She would never need her name again. But Hisako could use it to survive, to escape the curse of her father's sins, to have a chance at a future. Finally, as the sun began to set on that first day after the firestorm, Hisako made her choice. She carefully removed Chio's identification papers from her friend's pocket. She whispered an apology to the body. "I am sorry, my friend. I am so sorry. But you do not need this anymore, and I have nothing. Please forgive me. I will honor your name. I will live well for both of us." Then she walked away from the body, leaving Hisako Mizuki dead in the ruins, and became Chio Nakamura. The transformation was not easy. Hisako had to learn everything about Chio's life, to become her completely. Fortunately, they had been close friends for over a year, and Chio had talked often about her family, her neighborhood, her life before the war. Hisako memorized every detail, every story, every memory. She found the ruins of the Nakamura home and built a shack there, claiming it as her family's property. When other survivors asked about her family, she said her mother Fumiko had been visiting relatives on the other side of the city during the bombing, and would return soon. For weeks, Hisako lived in terror that someone would expose her. But Tokyo was in such chaos that no one questioned anything. Millions were displaced, records were destroyed, families were scattered. If you said you were someone, you were that person. Identity was self-declared. The authorities were overwhelmed just trying to provide basic food and shelter. They had no resources to verify anyone's claims. Then Fumiko actually appeared. The real Fumiko Nakamura, Chio's mother, returned from the countryside where she had been staying with relatives during the bombing. She came looking for her daughter and her home. Hisako saw her from a distance, a stern-looking woman in her late 40s, asking neighbors about the Nakamura family. Hisako's heart stopped. This was it. She would be exposed, arrested, punished for stealing a dead girl's identity. But then something unexpected happened. A neighbor told Fumiko that her daughter had been seen among the dead, that Chio Nakamura had not survived. Fumiko collapsed in grief. Hisako watched from hiding, her mind racing. She could reveal herself, claim to be Chio, and take the place of this woman's dead daughter. But one look at Fumiko told her it would never work. A mother knows her own child. Fumiko would see through the deception immediately. The face might be close enough to fool strangers, but not a mother. So Hisako made a different choice. She stayed hidden. She let Fumiko believe her daughter was dead. She watched as Fumiko mourned, as she built a shack in the ruins, as she tried to rebuild a life alone. And Hisako continued to live as Chio Nakamura. But she stayed away from the old neighborhood, away from anyone who might have known the real Chio well. The guilt was crushing. She had not only stolen her friend's identity, but had also denied a grieving mother the comfort of knowing her daughter had survived. But Hisako told herself it was necessary, that revealing the truth would destroy everything, that she had to commit fully to this new life or abandon it entirely. And she could not abandon it. She could not go back to being Hisako Mizuki, the cursed daughter of a traitor. That girl was dead, and she had to stay dead. Hisako, now calling herself Chio, found work at a relief station run by American military personnel and Japanese civilians. She spoke some English, learned in school before the war, and she was literate and organized. The work gave her purpose and kept her mind occupied, though the guilt never left her. Every night she thought about the real Chio lying in a mass grave somewhere, nameless and forgotten. She thought about Fumiko, mourning alone. She thought about the lie she was living. It was at this relief station that she met Lowell Hartwell in October 1945. He was 23 years old, a farm boy from Nebraska who had been drafted into the Army in 1943. He was kind and respectful, different from the other soldiers. While his friend Virgil Cassidy spent his time drinking and chasing women, Lowell volunteered at relief stations, trying to help rebuild the country he had been trained to destroy. When Lowell started paying attention to the quiet Japanese girl who organized supplies with meticulous efficiency, Hisako was terrified. She had been avoiding close relationships precisely because they might expose her secret. But Lowell was persistent, and she was desperately lonely. Slowly, she allowed herself to get closer to him, always careful, never to reveal too much, always maintaining the fiction of being Chio Nakamura. Their relationship developed over months. Lowell was drawn to her quiet dignity and resilience. Hisako, pretending to be Chio, found herself falling in love with his genuine kindness. But the guilt ate at her constantly. She was lying to him about everything, about who she was, where she came from, what she had survived. Every conversation was a performance, every shared moment built on deception. In November 1945, Lowell asked about her family. Hisako, as Chio, told him a carefully constructed story. She said her father had died in the war, which was true of the real Chio's father. She said her mother Fumiko was alive, but they had become estranged, which was partially true. Fumiko was alive, but she was not Hisako's mother, and had no idea Chio had survived. She said her best friend Tsukiko had died in the firebombing, which was true, though she changed the story slightly, combining elements of what had happened to the real Chio with her own experience of losing her friend. By early 1946, Lowell and Hisako were deeply in love, though Lowell knew her as Chio. He saw her sadness and assumed it was grief from the war, never suspecting it was guilt from living a lie. When he asked about her past, she gave vague answers, claiming the memories were too painful. Lowell respected her boundaries, never pushing, which only made her guilt worse. He was so good, so trusting, and she was deceiving him completely. In March 1946, Lowell proposed. He got down on one knee in Ueno Park and asked her to marry him, to come to America, to build a life together. Hisako wanted desperately to say yes, but she knew that accepting meant committing to this lie forever. Once she married him as Chio Nakamura, there would be no going back. She would have to maintain the deception for the rest of her life. She asked for time to think. That night she walked to the neighborhood where Fumiko lived. She watched from a distance as the older woman sat alone in her shack, cooking a meager meal over a small fire. Fumiko looked so sad, so worn down by grief and loss. Hisako thought about revealing herself, about confessing everything, about giving Fumiko back her daughter, even if that daughter was an imposter, but she could not do it. The real Chio was dead. Telling Fumiko that someone was pretending to be her daughter would only add to her pain. And if Hisako revealed herself as an imposter, she would be arrested, punished, possibly killed. The Yakuza might even come after her for her father's debts and betrayal. She would lose Lowell, lose her chance at a future, lose everything. So she made her choice. She would marry Lowell as Chio Nakamura. She would go to America and leave Japan behind forever, leave Fumiko behind, leave the truth behind. She would bury Hisako Mizuki so deep that she would never resurface. She would become Chio Nakamura completely, in every way that mattered. When she told Lowell yes, he was overjoyed. He immediately began the complicated process of getting approval to marry a Japanese national. The U.S. military required extensive paperwork, background checks, and approval from commanding officers. Hisako was terrified that the background check would expose her. But the chaos of post-war Japan worked in her favor. Records were destroyed, offices were overwhelmed, and the Americans were not particularly thorough about checking Japanese civilian identities. The name Chio Nakamura appeared on no criminal or watch lists. The real Chio had been a model citizen from a respectable family. The application was approved. The wedding took place in November 1946. It was a simple civil ceremony with no family present. Hisako, as Chio, told Lowell that her mother Fumiko had refused to attend because she disapproved of the marriage. This was a convenient lie that explained the absence and also set up a narrative of family estrangement that would prevent future questions. In truth, Hisako had gone to see Fumiko one last time before the wedding. She watched from a distance as Fumiko went about her daily routine, never knowing that the girl who had stolen her daughter's name was nearby. Hisako whispered a goodbye to the woman who would never be her mother-in-law, to the life she was leaving behind, to the truth she was burying forever. After the wedding, Hisako moved into base housing with Lowell. Life as a war bride was isolating and difficult. The other American wives made it clear she was not welcome, but Hisako barely noticed. She was too consumed with maintaining her deception, with being Chio Nakamura every moment of every day. She could never relax, never let her guard down, never reveal anything that might contradict the story she had constructed. The constant performance was exhausting. She had to remember every detail of the false history she had created, every story she had told Lowell, every claim she had made. She lived in constant fear that someone from Japan would appear and expose her, that some document would surface, that some detail would not match up. The stress gave her insomnia and anxiety, but she could not explain the real reason to Lowell. He assumed she was struggling with the culture shock and discrimination, which was also true, but it was not the whole truth. In 1947, Hisako received a shock. A letter arrived addressed to Chio Nakamura. It was from a distant relative of the real Chio, someone who had survived the war and was trying to reconnect with scattered family members. The letter asked about Fumiko and expressed hope that Chio had survived. Hisako burned the letter immediately and lived in terror for weeks, expecting more contact. But none came. The relative had probably written to dozens of people and received no response from most. In the chaos of post-war Japan, unreturned letters were common. In late 1948, Hisako became pregnant. She was both overjoyed and terrified. A child meant another person she would be lying to for their entire life. Her daughter would grow up believing she was the granddaughter of Fumiko Nakamura, believing her mother's name was Chio, believing a history that was completely false. The weight of this realization was crushing, but there was no turning back. Margot was born in January 1949. Holding her baby for the first time, Hisako felt overwhelming love mixed with devastating guilt. This innocent child would never know the truth of who her mother really was. Hisako made a vow in that moment. She would protect Margot from the truth no matter what. The lie had to be maintained perfectly, forever, because if it ever came out, it would destroy everything: her marriage, her family, her entire life. This vow meant absolute silence about the past. Hisako could never talk about her real childhood, her real parents, her real experiences. She could only speak about Chio's life, which she knew secondhand from conversations with her dead friend. So she chose to speak about the past as little as possible. She told Margot that it was too painful to discuss, that the war had taken everything, that it was better to look forward. This became her pattern for the next 70 years. In 1952, Lowell's service ended, and they prepared to move to America. Hisako was both relieved and terrified. America meant permanent distance from anyone who might expose her, but it also meant no possibility of ever reclaiming her real identity. Once she left Japan, Hisako Mizuki would be dead forever, buried in the ruins of Tokyo, and only Chio Nakamura would exist. The journey to America was physically difficult, but emotionally devastating. As the ship crossed the Pacific, Hisako stood on deck one night looking back toward Japan. She thought about the real Chio, lying in an unmarked grave. She thought about Fumiko, who would live the rest of her life believing her daughter had died in the firebombing. She thought about Hisako Mizuki, the girl she had been, now erased from existence. She whispered goodbye to all of them and turned toward the future, toward a life built entirely on a lie. They arrived in Nebraska in August 1952. Lowell's mother, Dorothea, was cold and unwelcoming, but Hisako barely registered it. She had bigger concerns than a disapproving mother-in-law. She was in a completely foreign country, with a new language and culture, maintaining a false identity, with no one who knew the truth. The isolation was absolute. The discrimination from the townspeople was harsh, but Hisako used it to her advantage. The more isolated she was, the less likely anyone would ask detailed questions about her past. She became the quiet, mysterious Japanese war bride who kept to herself, and people accepted that. She learned to deflect questions, to give vague answers, to change subjects smoothly. She became an expert at evasion. The years passed in a blur of careful performance. Hisako, as Chio, raised Margot, managed the household, and played the role of dutiful wife. But she never fully relaxed, never fully trusted that the secret was safe. Every knock on the door might be someone from Japan. Every letter might be the one that exposed her. Every conversation might be the one where she slipped up and revealed something that contradicted her false history. The psychological toll was immense. She developed severe anxiety and depression but could not seek proper help because therapy would require talking about her past and she could not risk that. She had nightmares. Not just about the firebombing, but about being exposed, about police coming to arrest her for identity theft, about Lowell discovering the truth and leaving her, about Margot learning that her entire life was built on a lie. Margot grew up sensing her mother's sadness and distance but never understanding it. Hisako wanted to be closer to her daughter but could not risk it. True intimacy required honesty, and honesty would destroy everything. So she maintained a careful distance, loving Margot but never fully letting her in, always keeping the wall up. Lowell tried to bridge the gap between them. He encouraged Hisako to talk about her past, to share her culture with Margot, to maintain connections to Japan. But Hisako refused, claiming it was too painful. In truth, she could not risk teaching Margot Japanese culture because she might make mistakes that would reveal she was not who she claimed to be. She could not share family stories because they were not her family stories. She could not maintain connections to Japan because someone might recognize that she was not Chio Nakamura. So she cut herself off from everything Japanese, becoming as American as possible, erasing every trace of her real identity. The decades passed. Margot grew up and left home. She married Elliot Brennan and had children of her own. Hisako became a grandmother, finally experiencing moments of pure joy with her grandchildren. But even with them, she maintained the careful distance, the protective wall of silence. In the 1990s, Hisako received another shock. Through a Japanese-American community newsletter, she learned that Fumiko Nakamura had died in 1960. The real Chio's mother had lived 15 more years, alone and grieving, believing her daughter had died in 1945. Hisako was devastated. She had stolen not only Chio's name but also Fumiko's last years with her daughter. Fumiko had died never knowing that someone was living as Chio, never having the chance to reconcile or say goodbye. The guilt was overwhelming. Hisako also learned through the newsletter that someone had erected a memorial stone for Chio Nakamura in a Tokyo cemetery, listing her as a victim of the 1945 firebombing. The real Chio was being remembered and honored, but under the wrong circumstances. She had not died in the firebombing. She had died shortly after from smoke inhalation and injuries. And the woman living as Chio Nakamura in Nebraska was an imposter who had stolen her name and her life. When Lowell died in 1998, Hisako's carefully constructed world began to crumble. Lowell had been her anchor, the reason she maintained the lie. Without him, the performance felt pointless. She was 70 years old, living alone in Nebraska, carrying a secret that had poisoned her entire life. She had spent 53 years as Chio Nakamura, longer than she had been Hisako Mizuki, but she had never stopped being an imposter, never stopped feeling like a fraud. The years after Lowell's death were the darkest of her life. The guilt and loneliness were crushing. She thought constantly about confessing, about finally telling the truth, but she could not imagine how. How could she tell Margot that her entire life was a lie, that her mother was not who she claimed to be, that even her grandmother's name was false? How could she admit to Lowell's memory that she had deceived him for over 50 years? How could she face the legal consequences of identity theft even decades later? So she stayed silent, trapped in the lie, slowly being destroyed by it. She might have taken the secret to her grave if not for what happened in November 2014. Elliot visited her with a request. He was teaching a unit on World War II and wanted her to speak to his class about her experiences as a Japanese war bride. He said her story mattered, that it was part of history, that students needed to hear it. He said, "These kids need to know that war is not just about battles and generals, it is about girls like you who lost everything. Your voice matters, Chio. Please, help me teach them." That name, Chio, struck her like a physical blow. She was not Chio. She had never been Chio. She was Hisako Mizuki, the daughter of a disgraced yakuza, a girl who had died in the ruins of Tokyo and been replaced by an imposter. For 70 years, she had lived a lie, and now she was being asked to share that lie with students, to perpetuate it further, to bury the truth even deeper. She told Elliot she would think about it. After he left, she sat alone in the dark for hours. She was 86 years old. How much longer did she have? 5 years? 10 at most? Did she want to die as an imposter, having never told the truth to anyone? Did she want Margot to learn the truth after her death, perhaps finding documents or evidence that would reveal the deception? Or did she want to finally, after 70 years, speak the truth? The thought terrified her. Confessing meant destroying everything. Margot would be devastated. The family would be thrown into chaos. Her entire life would be revealed as a fraud. She might even face legal consequences, though at 86, what could they really do to her? But more than the practical concerns, she was terrified of finally admitting the truth to herself, of acknowledging that she had lived 70 years as someone she was not, that she had stolen a dead girl's identity and built a life on that theft. But she was also exhausted. 70 years of lying, of performing, of never being able to relax, of never being able to be truly known by anyone. It had hollowed her out. She was tired of the secret, tired of the guilt, tired of the fear. She wanted, for once in her life, to tell the truth. She wanted someone to know who she really was. She wanted to stop being Chio Nakamura, and finally, after all these years, be Hisako Mizuki again, even if only for a moment. In December 2014, she called Margot and asked her to visit. She said there was something important she needed to share. Margot came immediately, sensing the gravity in her mother's voice. She arrived to find her mother sitting at the kitchen table with a small wooden box in front of her. The box that had always been locked and hidden. The box Margot had never been allowed to see. Hisako opened the box. Inside were a few items: a photograph of a young girl, identification papers with the name Hisako Mizuki, a letter from a Yakuza clan demanding payment for her father's debts, and a small notebook where she had written down everything she knew about Chio Nakamura's life so she could memorize it and become her. Margot looked at the contents, confused. Who is Hisako Mizuki? And Hisako, in a voice that trembled but did not break, said the words she had never spoken in 70 years. I am. My name is not Chio Nakamura. It never was. I am Hisako Mizuki, and I stole your grandmother's name from her dead body in 1945. The confession took hours. Hisako told Margot everything. About her real father, the disgraced Yakuza who had been executed. About her friendship with the real Chio Nakamura. About the night of the firebombing and finding Chio's body. About the decision to take her identity. About Fumiko, the real Chio's mother, who had died believing her daughter was dead. About the 70 years of lying, of performing, of never being able to be honest with anyone, not even her own husband and daughter. Margot listened in shock, her entire understanding of her life crumbling. Her mother was not her mother, not really. Her grandmother was not her grandmother. Her family history was a lie. Even her own name, Margot Nakamura Hartwell, was built on a stolen identity. Why? Margot finally asked, tears streaming down her face. Why did you do it? Why did you lie to us for 70 years? Hisako explained about the stigma of her father's disgrace, about how she would have been pushed to the absolute bottom of society, forced into prostitution or worse. She explained that taking Chio's identity had been a matter of survival, that she had not known she would fall in love with Lowell, that once the lie started, she could not stop it without destroying everything. I am sorry, Hisako said, weeping. I am so sorry. I know this changes everything. I know you will never see me the same way. But I could not die without telling you the truth. I could not let you live your whole life not knowing who your mother really was. Margot was devastated, angry, confused. She left that night without saying goodbye, needing time to process the revelation. For weeks, she did not contact her mother. Hisako lived in agony, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake, if she should have taken the secret to her grave. But slowly, Margot came to understand. She researched the post-war period in Japan, learned about the Yakuza system and the stigma attached to criminals' families, understood the desperate circumstances that had driven her mother to such an extreme act. She realized that her mother had been a 15-year-old girl, traumatized and alone, making an impossible choice in order to survive. She realized that the lie had not been malicious but desperate, and that her mother had carried the guilt and fear for 70 years, never being able to be truly known or loved for who she really was. In January 2015, Margot returned. She sat down with her mother and said, I do not understand everything. I am still hurt and confused, but I understand that you did what you had to do to survive, and I understand that you have been carrying this alone for 70 years. You do not have to carry it alone anymore. They cried together, mother and daughter, finally honest with each other for the first time. Margot had 1,000 questions, and Hisako answered them all. She talked about her real parents, her real childhood, her real experiences during the war. She talked about the real Chiyo, about their friendship, about the guilt of taking her name. She talked about Fumiko and the pain of watching her grieve from a distance. She talked about the 70 years of performance, of never being able to relax, of never being able to be truly herself. Margot asked what her mother wanted to do now. Did she want to reclaim her real name? Did she want to go public with the truth? Hisako thought carefully. She was 87 years old. Legally changing her name back to Hisako Mizuki would be complicated and would raise questions. Going fully public might result in legal consequences or public scandal. But she wanted to stop lying, at least to her family. They reached a compromise. Publicly, she would remain Chiyo Nakamura. The legal and social complications of changing that at her age were too great. But privately, with family, she would be Hisako. Margot would call her by her real name. Her grandchildren would learn the truth. The family would know who she really was. 2 weeks later, Hisako stood in front of Elliot's history class, 87 years old and terrified. She had decided to tell them the truth, or at least a version of it. Not the full confession, that was too complex and too personal, but a truth about identity and survival that she had never been able to speak before. She told the students about the firebombing of Tokyo. She told them about being a 15-year-old girl in the ruins, traumatized and alone. And then she said something that shocked them. Many of us who survived did so by becoming someone else. We left our old identities in the ashes and became new people. Sometimes that was literal, taking new names, creating new histories, and sometimes it was psychological. But all of us war brides. We crossed the ocean and became someone different. We buried our pasts because they were too painful to carry. We became American wives and mothers, and we never spoke of the girls we had been before the fire. The students listened in rapt attention. After the presentation, a girl asked, "Do you regret becoming someone else? Do you wish you could have stayed who you were?" Hisako answered honestly, "I regret that I had to choose. I regret that survival meant erasing myself. But I do not regret surviving. I built a life. I have a daughter and grandchildren who are extraordinary. I only regret that it took me 70 years to tell the truth about who I really was." After that day, Hisako began speaking more openly, always carefully, never revealing the full extent of her deception publicly, but speaking truths about identity, survival, and the cost of silence. She connected with other Japanese war brides, and she found that many of them had similar stories of reinvention, of leaving their old selves behind, of becoming new people in order to survive. She gave interviews and spoke at events, always as Chiyo Nakamura publicly, but feeling more and more like Hisako Mizuki privately. She had finally found a way to honor both identities, the girl she had been and the woman she had become. In 2016, Margot took her mother to Japan. It was Hisako's first time back in 64 years. Tokyo was unrecognizable, a gleaming modern city with no trace of the ruins she remembered. They visited the memorial for firebombing victims, and Hisako placed flowers for the real Chiyo Nakamura, whose name was inscribed on the wall. She whispered an apology to her old friend. "I am sorry I took your name. I am sorry I lived the life that should have been yours, but I promise you I tried to honor it. I tried to live well. I hope, wherever you are, you can forgive me." They also visited Fumiko's grave. Hisako knelt before the stone and spoke to the woman who had been Chiyo's mother, who had died never knowing the truth. "I am not your daughter," she whispered, "but I loved her. She was my friend, and I have carried her memory for 70 years. I am sorry you never knew she tried to save me by giving me her name even in death. I am sorry for all the pain, but I want you to know that the Nakamura name has been honored. I gave it to my daughter, and she has given it to her children. Your family line continues, even if not in the way you would have wanted." The trip brought a measure of peace. Hisako had finally returned to where it all began, had finally acknowledged the truth out loud at the graves of those she had wronged, had finally started to forgive herself. She spent her final years speaking and sharing her story, always carefully, always maintaining the public fiction of being Chiyo Nakamura, while privately reclaiming her identity as Hisako Mizuki. She became an advocate for other war brides, for immigrants who had to reinvent themselves to survive, for anyone who had ever had to bury their true self in order to make it in a hostile world. In 2018, she gave a TEDx talk titled, "The Names We Carry." She spoke about identity, about survival, about the cost of silence and the power of truth. She did not confess the full extent of her deception publicly. That would have been too dangerous legally and too devastating for her family. But she spoke in metaphors and generalities that allowed her to finally express the truth of her experience. Hisako Mizuki, who the world knew as Chio Nakamura, died peacefully in her sleep on December 10, 2019. She was 92 years old. At her funeral, Margot gave a eulogy that honored both of her mother's identities. "My mother lived two lives," Margot said. She was born Hisako Mizuki, a girl who faced impossible circumstances and made an impossible choice to survive. She became Chio Nakamura, a name she carried with honor for 70 years. Some might say she lived a lie. I say she lived a truth that was too complicated for simple judgment. She survived. She loved. She raised a family. She built a life from ashes. And in her final years, she found the courage to finally speak her truth, to finally be known for who she really was. She taught me that identity is not always simple, that survival sometimes requires us to become someone else, and that the bravest thing we can do is eventually find our way back to ourselves. After her death, Margot donated her mother's recordings, letters, and writings to the Japanese American National Museum. The collection is titled The Hisako Mizuki Chio Nakamura Papers, and includes a full written confession that Hisako had prepared to be opened only after her death. In it, she tells the complete truth of what she did, asks for forgiveness from the real Chio's family if any remain, and explains her reasons. The museum chose to keep the confession sealed for 50 years after her death, until 2069, to protect her family from potential legal or social consequences. But they did create an exhibit about identity and survival among war brides that includes Hisako's story, told carefully and with sensitivity to the complexity of what she did. The wooden box that Hisako kept hidden for so many years now sits in a museum display case. Inside are the identification papers for Hisako Mizuki, the photograph of the real Chio Nakamura, and a note Hisako wrote in her final days. "I stole a dead girl's name in order to survive. I have carried the guilt for 70 years, but I also carried her memory, honored her family name, and tried to live a life worthy of the gift she unknowingly gave me. I hope that counts for something. I hope, in the end, that both Hisako Mizuki and Chio Nakamura can rest in peace." What Hisako did, stealing her friend's identity to escape an impossible situation, is something that would be almost unthinkable today. In our modern world of databases, biometrics, and digital records, assuming someone else's identity is nearly impossible. But in the chaos of post-war Japan, with millions dead and records destroyed, it was possible. And for a desperate 15-year-old girl with no other options, it was a matter of survival. Her story raises uncomfortable questions about identity, morality, and survival. Was what she did wrong? Objectively, yes. She stole a dead person's identity and deceived everyone in her life for 70 years. But was it understandable? Also, yes. She was a child, traumatized and alone, facing a future of degradation and possibly death because of her father's sins. She made a choice that allowed her to survive and eventually thrive. The real tragedy is that she had to make that choice at all. The real tragedy is that post-war Japanese society was so rigid and unforgiving that a 15-year-old girl had no path forward except to erase herself and become someone else. The real tragedy is that she carried the guilt and fear for 70 years, never able to be truly known or truly loved for who she actually was. But in the end, she spoke. She told the truth to her daughter. She reclaimed her real name, at least privately. She stopped living entirely as an imposter and found a way to honor both the girl she had been and the woman she had become. And in doing so, she gave voice not only to herself, but to countless others who have had to reinvent themselves to survive, who have had to bury their true identities, who have lived with secrets that shaped and scarred them. Hisako Mizuki was 15 years old when she died in the ruins of Tokyo and was reborn as Chio Nakamura. She was 86 years old when she finally spoke her real name out loud again. In between was a lifetime of deception, survival, and quiet strength, but in the end, she found her voice, and the world listened. If this story moved you, Please subscribe to our channel for more untold histories that shaped our world. Hit the like button and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. What would you have done in her place? Let us know below.